It's killed 56% of all humans that have ever contracted it. And for decades, we believed that it couldn't spread easily among humans because it settles deep in our lungs. But if it could evolve to become more easily airborne, the risk of a deadly outbreak would be all but guaranteed. And what's scary is that we may be moving along exactly that path. Bird flu, known more formally as avian influenza, has long hovered on the horizon of scientists' fears. This pathogen, especially the H5N1 strain, hasn't often infected humans, but when it does, 56% of those that contract it die. Its inability to spread easily from one person to another has kept it from causing a global pandemic, but things are starting to change, and fast. The virus has been responsible for numerous outbreaks in poultry for a long time, but now it's infecting an increasing number of migrating birds, which is leading to the virus being spread globally, including to different mammals. And that's a problem. It's increasing the likelihood of the new strain spreading among humans. And even more concerning, a mutated strain of H5N1 has been found to not only infect minks at a fur farm in Spain, but also apparently spreading among them, which has never been seen in mammals before. This is cause for concern as the upper respiratory tract of minks is highly capable of transmitting the virus to humans. And this is what's important. The global community must take decisive action now to prevent H5N1 from turning into a catastrophic pandemic. And although we possess several crucial resources such as vaccines, what we lack is a sense of immediacy and swift action. You see, to effectively combat the emergence of new deadly pathogens, it is essential to suppress outbreaks promptly, and this starts with rapid detection. Currently, the United States, the World Health Organization, and international health officials have established influenza monitoring systems. But this isn't good enough. Many avian influenza specialists believe these networks are inadequate to meet the current level of threat. We simply wouldn't be able to detect the problem before it was too late. In order to improve surveillance, it's necessary to focus on people in the poultry sector, but we have to broaden its scope even beyond that. One example would be surveillance of pig farms. They are another animal susceptible to the flu. Adding to that, those who interact with wild birds and animals, as well as species of pets like ferrets, which are susceptible to the disease, are also at a heightened risk. However, simply detecting the virus is not enough, as suppressing it will require a comprehensive effort and coordination on a global scale. And one immediate action we can take right now is the closure of mink farms. Crowding tens of thousands of animals with a respiratory tract similar to ours, which is highly susceptible to the virus, is a recipe for incubating and spreading a deadly virus. In 2020, for example, when the coronavirus infected Danish mink farms and the minks generated new variants that spread to humans, efforts to save the industry were in vain as the outbreaks were uncontrollable. Now let's apply that to this flu. If an individual is simultaneously infected by different strains of flu, there's a possibility for the strains to exchange genetic segments and create a new, more easily spread version. If someone working in a mink farm who already has the flu becomes infected with H5N1, it could lead to the ignition of a global pandemic. And with a 56% mortality rate, hundreds of millions would die. To prevent the potential spread of this deadly virus, widespread and accessible testing should be implemented globally, particularly for individuals working in the poultry industry and those who come in contact with wild birds or other wildlife. The testing capabilities must also be increased at a rapid pace. In the United States, 91 public health laboratories are equipped to test for H5 influenza, and positive results are sent to the CDC, which provide further analysis that can determine H5N1 within 2 days. However, even with all of this, it is essential to have a plan in place to increase the number of tests and testing facilities in the event of a sudden surge in demand. But I do have some good news for you. We actually have several H5N1 vaccines already approved by the FDA, whose safety and immune response have been studied. Now for the bad news. The US government only has a small H5N1 vaccine stockpile, but it would be nowhere near enough if a serious outbreak occurred. The current plan is to mass produce them if and when such an outbreak occurs, based on the particular variant involved. And there's a lot of problems with this approach. Even assuming best case scenario, producing hundreds of millions of doses of a new vaccine would take at least 6 months. And it gets even worse. All but one of the approved vaccines are produced by incubating each dose in an egg. The US government keeps hundreds of thousands of chickens in secret farms with bodyguards. But the bodyguards are presumably there to fend off terror attacks, not a virus. And relying on chickens to produce vaccines against a virus that has a 90 to 100% fatality rate among poultry is essentially setting us up for disaster. And the only company with an FDA-approved non-egg-based H5N1 vaccine expects to be able to produce 150 million doses within 6 months of the declaration of a pandemic. But that's good news, right? Well, let's not forget that there are 7 billion people in the world. And if you're one of those people that only cares about the USA, that's less than half of our population. If the World Health Organization is to take the lead in expanding global vaccine manufacturing, it requires the support of wealthy countries and the cooperation of large pharmaceutical companies that have the patents and the know-how. But even with all this, there's still another challenge. You see, the problem with stockpiling flu vaccines is that they lose their potency over time and need updating as new variants arise. The US government is skeptical about creating a large stockpile, fearing that stored vaccines may not be effective against whatever strain becomes a pandemic, and worries that stockpiles will expire anyway. Officials also have faith that they can get new flu vaccines mass-produced rapidly, even if current production most likely won't be able to meet the demand. But this outlook isn't the smartest. Many influenza experts believe that older vaccines could still provide some protection against severe outcomes or even death. For example, in 2017, the CDC found the H5N1 vaccine made in 2004 and 2005 helped protect ferrets against the H5N2 virus in 2014. Other investigations in 2006 showed that 80% of the US stockpile of earlier H5N1 vaccines were still potent a full year after their expected 1-year shelf life had passed. And finally, in 2019, another study found that H5N1 vaccines produced as early as 2004 were still potent a full 12 years later. Another way to aid in prevention could be voluntary vaccination, especially for high-risk groups like poultry workers and healthcare workers, who would be treating patients should an outbreak occur. Voluntary vaccinations could also produce larger-scale data on the safety and dosing specifics of vaccines. Vaccinating poultry workers has the additional big benefit of helping suppress outbreaks in the first place. Of course, this is controversial, but it's just one of the many avenues that we could go down. We could also look into widespread vaccination for chickens and turkeys. Had all poultry been vaccinated earlier, perhaps H5N1 would have never spread so widely to wild birds. Although it's late, mass vaccination of poultry and pigs could help prevent a possible further outbreak. We also already have antivirals for the flu, which work regardless of strain, but they need to be administered early, which requires widespread early testing, easy access, and sufficient and equitable stockpiles globally. Regardless of the methods we choose, we need to act now. Until 2020, when the new H5N1 strain began to spread extensively among wild birds, most big outbreaks occurred only among poultry. But now, with wild birds acting as conduits, it's not just the biggest outbreak ever among poultry, causing the death of at least 150 animals so far, but it's also steadily expanding its reach, including to mammal species like dolphins and bears. The warning signs of an even deadlier pandemic are all here, and we could get lucky. We've had bird flu outbreaks before without human spread, but it seems foolish to count on that. And let me remind you that the current fatality rate is 56% of known human cases so far. When comparing to COVID, which is estimated to have killed 1% to 2% of those infected before vaccines or treatments were available, if we don't act now, we may be facing a pandemic that we won't ever be able to return from. So this time, let's not wait until it's too late. A pandemic isn't all our worries though. If you want to see how the US and China might be going to war by 2025, click this link.